Not often will you hear an exposition on the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel, but I do believe it's very important. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity here. The Sweep of Future History. It's really the angel's historical forecast. That's not a bad alternative title. It is clearly a message for humanity. There's no question about it. A prophecy must be specific, accurate, must have chronology. Chronology is the order of things. It must have that, and the predicted events must occur in the future. You understand that? It has to be ahead of us, not currently happening or in the past. And so a prophecy must be verifiable historically, because if we can't verify it from history, then really there is not a lot of reason to have confidence. The time of the prophecy is essential. You must know the time of the prophecy. Otherwise, you can't determine whether it is as such a prophecy or just an historical account. I'll give you the date. The date that we're talking about is the 3rd year of Cyrus. The 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, and the very year would be 536 BC. I want you to remember that date, 536 BC. Can you remember that date? Put it in there. It's helpful. It's helpful. There's a political background. The Jews were taken into exile from Judah to Babylon, which Babylon was then conquered by Cyrus. They're now under the Medo-Persians. At this year, there have been some returnees. About 60,000 returned to Judah for the purpose to build their houses, their villages, the city of Jerusalem, but most importantly, rebuilding the temple. Without the temple, they didn't have a soul, so to speak. Here is a little map, and I've put down on the left side the 3 dates. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, took them all around this route. That's about 600 miles, and they had to walk it. And that's when he took them to Babylon, right down there, around this area here. The first one, 606 BC, is when Daniel was taken, which is the prophet that we take notice of now, because he wrote that 11th chapter. 597, a man by the name of Ezekiel was taken away. And some of the nobles, the upper crust. Then in 586 BC, there was the 3rd and final incursion by Nebuchadnezzar. It destroyed Jerusalem and the temple, the Solomonic temple. And most of the people were taken away to Babylon. So that 606, it's very interesting when you look at that date and you look at this date, you will have a difference of what? 70 years. 70 years. That was predicted, 70 years. Now, Daniel has a vision, and it really starts in chapter 10. And in that vision, it's during the day, he is with other people, he's at the river Tigris, and I'll show you the map in a minute, and he's there and he sees celestial beings. It's interesting to him, it is true to life. It so affects him, it almost knocks him out, so to speak. But the people around him don't see anything. But they perceive that he has a vision, and they're profoundly troubled. Actually, they run away. The location would be somewhere around about the Tigris River. That's the river Euphrates, and that's the Tigris River down there. Somewhere around about there, it would have occurred. We don't know the precise spot, but that's where it would have happened. Now, the angel makes an approach, and the angel gives a historical forecast, and he says this: "Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days." Now, when we say your people, Daniel is a Jew, and it's about the Jewish people. In the mind of Daniel, that's all it is. What will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days to come yet. The angel is giving the indication that this vision is long way into the future. That's what he's saying. And now, and this is fascinating. I wish I had a lot of time, I could dwell on this, but he says, I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. The prince of Persia? We have King Cyrus. He is not talking about, if you read chapter 10 and 11 of the book of Daniel, it talks about princes, they're rulers. That's the Hebrew word there, they're also rulers. So there's a ruler of Persia, but it's not Cyrus, but it is the one that is trying to control Cyrus. Do you understand what I'm saying? The one who has a negative impact, because Gabriel is on the good side and he's fighting him. Behind the scenes, and this is a reality, and you can dismiss it, that's all right. That doesn't alter the fact that it happens. There is a controversy which we don't observe. That is finding place. The real controversy is about our mindsets. And it still affects each and every one of us. Now, what is interesting here is this. I don't want to talk so much what's happening behind the curtain in the unseen world, though a lot is happening. He says, when I've gone or when I'm done with this, indeed the Prince of Greece will come. Now, there was no Prince of Greece that came, not really. Of course, if you think of Alexander, he was a king. He was the first king. Philip of Macedon never pronounced himself king. Again, it's a ruler that influences the king of Greece. And he's just alluding to that. What is significant of that statement is that after Medo-Persia, Greece will be on the menu. Greece will be there. And that's already reiterated a few different occasions, some 12 to 14 years before. Now, he says, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. Now, the Persian Empire had about 14 would be more accurate, 14 rulers. He's not limited to this 3. He is particularly using that number to get to number 4. He says the 4th one shall be richer than them all. He wants to talk about number 4. And the reason is this. He says, by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. He is giving the reason why Greece ultimately will defeat the Medo-Persians. Because it was revenge that moved Alexander, particularly in his combating the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, currently ruling, I just want you to see this. Currently, we have Cyrus the Great, right? He's not one of the 3. We get his son, Cambyses, ruled for 7.5 years, false murders, I'll talk about him in a minute, a little bit, but ruled for about 4 or 5 months, then he got murdered. Killed. Then we have Darius Hystaspes, Darius I, quite a prominent one. But number 4 here, and I'll give the numbers in a minute, is a very interesting person, Xerxes or Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is his other name, and we will know him from the book of Extra. I'm just going to go through that list again. Currently, on your left top, Cyrus the Great. Let's look at number 1. That is Cambyses, ruled for about 7.5 years. False murders, was a usurper. He tried to pretend to be the brother of Cambyses, but he wasn't. He was killed. He was murdered for only 4 or 5 months. That's all he ruled. Then we have number 3, Darius Hystaspes. Darius Hystaspes is the one king that reinforced the decree that the Jews should go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. He gave that in 520 BC, 4 or 5 years later, the latter part of 516 BC, the second temple was finished. Nothing like the Solomonic temple, but they had a temple, and it was dedicated. Now, the next one, Ahasuerus, as I said, we know him from the book of Esther. Interesting person. He had an absolute fascination with his harem. You know what a harem is, isn't it? Some people collect stamps, others play golf. He had a harem. He loved the intrigues of that. But he was extremely wealthy. There's one more Persian ruler I must mention, and that is Artaxerxes right there. His name is really Artaxerxes Longimanus, and he's of interest to us because under him served Ezra and Nehemiah. They served under him. So that gives you a perspective of the time frame. Are you all with me so far? I don't expect you to remember everything. Be nice if you did. What I'm going to do today here is give you facts after facts. I'll give you dates, I'll give you names, I'll give you events that occurred so you know. You can go home and check it. You understand? Okay. 536 BC, this prophecy was made. And that is fascinating if you bear in mind that the Grecian Empire in the year 536 BC was still a few hundred years away. In fact, it was unlikely that they ever would be capable doing what they did do. It's a bit like saying, I hope there's no New Zealanders, New Zealand is going to conquer the world. That's a laugh. That's it, I got one laugh. Okay. This is an old movie. I took this picture because that's how we used to travel, even to the battlefield. They had to carry him. Wonderful. He should have walked, but anyway. And so, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece 480 BC. And I'll show you the map. The incursion is quite significant. This is, of course, Turkey, and the one on the left, of course, is Greece. Have a look. He used ponds, boats, to build the bridge, and he went all the way around there, and he finally got to Athens, and he did so in the year 480 BC, and he wreaked havoc in Athens. And the Grecians never forgave him for it, and I can understand that. It's interesting that Darius Hystaspes also had an incursion, but he never made it to Greece. To Marathon, that was as close as he got, and that was 10 years earlier, and they were beaten back as well. Some very interesting battles, no time to go into it, because there's so much material coming your way, but fascinating. The Grecians, they beat the navy of the Persians right round about Salamis, and then the land forces pushed them back 2 years later. The Persians wished they never had gone to Greece. Great place for a holiday, not good to fight. And that's what happened. If you look at the Persian Empire, it is absolutely significant, isn't it? It's a massive, almost all the way. The Indus River is still a bit further away, but it is a massive empire. Massive. Note what the angel is telling Daniel. He says, then a mighty king shall arise. It's a king. He was a king. Who shall rule with great dominion. We know already who we're talking about. Do according to his will. That is Alexander, all right? He did exactly what he wanted to do. Alexander the Great, 357 BC, and died in 323 BC. I want to talk about that in a minute too. When he has arisen, been and gone, this is what will happen. His kingdom will be broken up. The prediction is that a few hundred years from there, from the time of the prophecy, what was the date of the prophecy again? Oh, you're good. A few hundred years away, the most unlikely people will have an empire. There's a strong ruler, and then his empire will be broken up. I hope you remember that. Of course, this is in harmony with other predictions that were made some 12 to 14 years earlier to Daniel. But it's just repeated here. It will be divided towards the four winds of heaven, but note this, but not among his posterity. Isn't that interesting? The interesting fact, you had dynasties. Philip of Macedon, his son, takes the reign. You would expect the son of Alexander, if he had one. He did have one, posthumous. You would expect his son to take over, wouldn't you? If you looked in the tea leaves, and this is not looking in the tea leaves here, if you look ahead by a few hundred years, you would expect a prediction that it would go and stay within the same dynasty. The angel made a point of it. He said it will not go to his posterity. Marvelous. That's a very fantastic prediction if it comes off. For his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides thee. Now have a look at Alexander. Unstoppable. Great technician. An incredible technician when it comes to warfare. Strategist number one. He started in 334. He came across the Hellespont. He's now fighting an army that is 40 times the size of his, by estimates. He has the first battle in Granicus. Then he has the next one in Issus. Then he goes down south and he starts a place by the name of, you guessed it, Alexandria. Where do you think that name came from? And so something happened. And then finally he comes back and he has a battle here at Gaugamela, although it's Arbela, that's normally the Battle of Arbela, that is how it's named. And the final battle where he defeated the last Persian ruler was in 331 BC. Now, that was an achievement. But I want to talk a little, this was given in 536 BC, by the way. I want you to see something. Say this is Judah, where you have Jerusalem, the Jews. Now, you know what Alexander used to do? He'd fight one city and then he sends a delegation to that city. And he would demand manpower. He would demand money. He would demand provisions. And what do you get in return? I'll leave you alone. Nothing. He told his soldiers, he said, you can come with me. You'll be fighting. I'm not going to close you. I'm not going to feed you. I'm not going to pay you. Come anyway. And they came. He had that capacity to really, deal with his army in that way. Fantastic. I want to talk a little bit about Jerusalem in a minute. See if I can get the other map up in a minute. And then I'll talk about it. No, here it is. That's an artist's impression of Jerusalem at the time. What you're looking at is the North Gate, because that's the only place where you didn't have a valley. All the other three sides had valleys. Couldn't take Jerusalem. You can only take Jerusalem. You could only take Jerusalem from the north. And that's what Titus did in 70 AD. So Alexander sent this delegation to Jerusalem. He wanted 10,000 men. He wanted provisions. Wouldn't mind a bit of loose change. And what else did he? I think that was about it. And they refused. They refused. And the reason why they refused is because they had no beef with their Persian overlord. They didn't want to be disloyal to their Persian overlord. They didn't want to take sides, but they didn't want to go against a contractual arrangement they had with their Persian overlords that they would not turn against them. Now, this is interesting. That meant if Alexander would win the preceding battle, he would come to Jerusalem and he would destroy Jerusalem. He would. He already took Tyre, the Phoenician city of Tyre. Nebuchadnezzar for 13 years tried to take the fortress island of Tyre. The land peace was easy. The fortress, it was just a little bit off the coast. 13 years he couldn't do it. Alexander did it in 8 months. No problem to Alexander. Alexander could have taken Jerusalem and absolutely annihilated and destroyed it. He set out to Jerusalem because they had refused. He had won the battle there at Issus. And when he came there, something very strange happened. Why did Alexander the Great in 333 BC spare Jerusalem? This is a true story. And this is a magnificent story. As he approached with his army, the gates of Jerusalem opened. And out of the gates came a procession of the high priest, the priests, all in white, carrying scrolls. And they were walking towards Alexander, a whole row of priests behind the high priest. And his army stopped. Alexander stopped. And then he got off his horse. He walked over to the high priest, and he bowed down to the high priest. That's exactly what every soldier in his army wanted to know. What's wrong with the man? Why is he doing that? He did that. He went with those priests into Jerusalem, no aggression. He even sacrificed in the temple according to their rules. And then his soldiers had to ask him, why did you do this? And he said, some time ago, and I think it was just under 2 years ago, as he was contemplating how to conquer the Persians, who were so much mightier than them, he had a dream. And in that dream, there was a procession of men coming in the outfits exactly, he said, like those men that he saw. It immediately bounced back to his mind. And he said, they would tell me that I better go and fight the Persians because I am destined to win. You know what they showed him? Because they told him that as well. They showed him chapter 8 of the book of Daniel. That's on the record, by the way. That's on the record. And Alexander was kindly disposed to the Jews, whatever they wanted. They even made a request. They said, we have fellow Jews all the way in Babylon, which was occupied by Persia. Could you see to it that they might worship in the manner in which they like to practice their faith? Alexander said, done, no problem, I'll see to it. Fantastic. Fantastic. An incredible story, but it's true. The name of the priest there was Yeshua. That was the name of the high priest. Alexander fought, conquered, until he came to the river Indus there in India. And then he had a problem. His men refused to go any further. For the first time, they disobeyed him. We're going home. How much wealth can you accumulate in the journey? You might come across some lovely furniture, but are you going to carry it for... You understand what I'm saying? They had enough. And he was forced to retreat, and on his way back, he stopped at Babylon. And when he stopped at Babylon, he was sick for about 11 days. He was a bit of a drinker, by the way. When I say a little bit, he could. And he had vile temper when he was drinking. He killed his best friend. Now, he was there, and we're not sure what happened, whether it was a disease as well. Whatever it is, the man was dying, and everybody knew it. And I like this painting, because that was his favorite pastime. And so he was doing that, and you have those 4 generals. He had a number of generals, about 4 or 5 of them. I think Antiochus was there as well. And they have a question for Alexander. They said to Alexander, sir, we don't want to. They did. When you die, who's going to take over the kingdom? His answer was typical Alexander and is famous. Does anybody know what he said? It shall go to the strongest. How do you like that? You know what he was saying? Fight for it. Fight for it. That's what he was saying. That's exactly what he was saying. You know where he was? Remember I gave you the story on Daniel 5, the writing on the wall. Can you remember that, some of you? At the very spot where Belshazzar had his farewell party, though he didn't know at the time it was a farewell party because it was his last night that he was alive. At the same spot is where Alexander the Great died in 323 BC. Interesting. Interesting. Massive kingdom. His kingdom shall be broken up towards the four winds of heaven. That's interesting. Now, when you look at the territory, you have four warring generals. I'd like you to have a quick look here. Cassander was one, Lysimachus is another, Seleucus is another, and there you have Ptolemy, from which we get the Ptolemaic pharaohs. The Ptolemaic pharaohs were not Egyptians, they were Macedonians or Greece. And so, let me put them on the board here. The Cassander, that to the left first, Cassander was one of them. Then you have Lysimachus. Then you have, of course, Ptolemy in the south, and then you have, of course, on the eastern side, Seleucus. The dynasty, now it's like this. Cassander was taken over by Lysimachus, who then again had his own trouble, and I won't go all the details, but he splintered up, that actually we only were left with those two. The Seleucid Empire, if you like, and Egyptian Ptolemaic Egypt was the other one. Can you see that so far, and are you following me so far? I'm just giving you the history. That took 25 years from the death of Alexander, and that's how it settled, and remained settled. Now we have a very interesting scenario. Let me reaffirm the division of four. From chapter 7, if you ever studied it, the four-headed leopard. Leopard is speed, the wings is huge distance, capacity. Four heads, and then you have, of course, in Daniel chapter 8, you have the goat with the four horns. Do you remember that? Yeah, that's right. So, there he is, indicating that it would fall apart in four pieces, and for the third time, we have the same confirmed here in chapter 11. Not to his posterity. This is interesting. That is Princess Roxana of Bactria. She married Alexander. That's his statue after there. And that's the kid he had posthumous. His name is Alexander IV. He never got old. They killed him, the generals, just in case he had any ambitions at all. Not even 20 or just 20. Now we get a very significant, to understand the book, the chapter 11 of the book of Daniel, you need to understand where the king of the north, warring or versus the king of the south, actually comes from. And this is what we're going to try to explain. You have a Seleucus Nicator who holds Greater Syria and a whole lot of territory beyond that to the east. And you have to the south the Ptolemaic pharaohs, Ptolemy and his descendants. These were dynasties, and they kept their dynasties, unlike Alexander. Now, the Seleucids is really this Greater Syria. Ptolemies, of course, are Egyptian, and there is the map. Have a look at this. This country here in the middle is what? Is who? Israel is Judah. Judah is, pardon the expression, is the ham between the sandwich. True? Because if this king wants to come down here and have an argument, he's got to go through there. And they help themselves to everything. If he wanted to go there and fight him, he has to go through there. Can you see that? It really impacts it. And so the Bible here, the angel simply refers, regardless of the ruler or the person, it coming from the north. Let me put the compass. That's the north, that's the south. Regardless, this is the king of the north. North to Israel, you understand? North to Judah. And this is the king of the south because they're south of Judah. You with me? Everybody gets that? Keep hanging on to that bit of information. And also the king of the south shall become strong. But Ptolemy was strong. So was Seleucus initially, and then he was booted out from here by another general by the name of Antigonus, who had a very ambitious son by the name of Demetrius. but both got killed, got done away with. What happened, actually, when that happened, is this. As well, one of his princes. In fact, it's interesting that Seleucus had to actually escape to the Ptolemy here. He helped him to, defeat Demetrius. When that was done, he went back here and he received a bit of assistance of Ptolemy, and he booted out Antigonus and he retook his territory. Now it's interesting, he did very well after that. He shall gain power over him. Well, he wasn't controlling him, but he was having more power than the one from the south, Ptolemy. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So we settled there with Seleucus and Ptolemy. That is exactly what happened. Now, what I just read was a statement by the angel giving in what year? 536. We are now 300 BC. You understand? We're well down the track. Antiochus Epiphanes is the next ruler. And there are the dates. We know when they were born and when they died. Only one that I couldn't find out the date of birth. And I don't think anybody ever did. Ptolemy Philadelphus is to the south. There are tensions. And they decided they're going to resolve the tension. And if you want to resolve the tension, there's one very good way. Marry the daughter of your enemy. Well, that's what they tried. This is a political marriage. Her name was Berenice. For the daughter, the angel said, of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north. Why? To make an agreement. Well, marriage is an agreement, isn't it? Anybody married here? It is, isn't it? Oh yeah, clap. He says yes. Okay, now, so we have a political marriage. Now you say there's nothing wrong with that. No, there was one tiny, weeny little problem. Theos was already married. He was married to his sister. Yes. Her name was Laodice. She didn't like it. She was pushed aside. And so were the kids, and they were denied any succession. And he married Berenice, and they had a child. And then, as so often happens down the track, Theos had second thoughts. He wanted to go back to Laodice, after all. She was not so bad. Actually, that's what he did. He went back to Laodice. And I'm going to tell you what happened. It's quite fascinating. This is what the angel told Daniel in what year? 536. Okay. Berenice shall not retain the power of her authority. And neither he nor his authority shall stand. What happened to them? So he went back to Laodice. And she forgave him. Well, at least that's what she must have told him. And like a good wife, she went to the kitchen and she cooked him a lovely meal. Bit heavy, mind you. But he fell asleep. One problem. He never woke up. And everybody knew he was poisoned. Guess who? Well, within a very short time, Berenice and her entourage plus the child was killed too. She butchered them all. No problem at all. Hell knows no fury. Yeah? Oh, yes. You know about that, do you? That's good. Okay. So that's what the angel foretold. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, her whole entourage. They were all killed. And with him who begot her, Ptolemy II. Now, Ptolemy II had nothing to do with that. He actually just died before Berenice got killed. But that is the name of her father. Note the next. The angel continues to talk. He says, but from a branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place. Her roots, well, she came from her father. Another branch, that is a sibling. In this case, a brother. Get it? So her brother shall arise in the place of his dad, because it is a dynasty that carries on. This is Ptolemy Euergetus. He has his nose a bit out of joint, hasn't he? So that's the best image I could get, I'm afraid. And so he is very angry about what they did do to his sister. He is very angry about the way they treated her and her entourage and the child, of course. So who shall come with an army? Now, can you see this? He comes with an army and he's got to go there. And that is exactly what he does. He enters the fortress of the king of the north. Note this. Deal with him and what? In the year 536 BC, the angel paints the circumstances of events all finding place. Then he says a brother will take a revenge and he will be successful. How good is this? Pretty good, isn't it? You have to say it's pretty good. It's really good. In fact, it's mind-boggling good. All in the right chronology, folks. All in the right chronology. And he shall carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes. Actually, in 525 BC, Cambyses took a lot of the images and statues of deities of Egypt because he conquered Egypt that year. And he placed it all down here. Now this Eurydice, he goes back and he takes all the booty back. And not only that, he takes hostages. He also, every precious article, he absolutely robbed them blind. He did very well out of this. Now the king of the north, by this time Callinicus, shall come to the kingdom of the south. Callinicus wants to take revenge. I just mixed them up. Okay. He now wants to go there and teach them a lesson. The problem is, it never worked. He shall return, the angel said, to his own land. Seleucus here, the second Callinicus, was defeated. He never looked good. Forced to return to Syria empty-handed, the year 240 BC. This is predicted almost 300 years before the event, in chronological order and absolutely correct. Are you still with me here? Yeah? Okay. Now, however, his sons, Callinicus' sons, here, they get very upset about that. And there's a Seleucus III, Serranus Soter. Then there is another one by the name of Antiochus III. He's also known as Antiochus the Great. His career ended up fighting the Romans and losing. The first one, he gets killed within 3 years. He's murdered, Seleucus. And therefore Antiochus III assembles a great multitude and he wants to go down south to teach them a lesson. Overwhelm, pass through to 19 BC. The problem is that the Battle of Raphia, he had to return to his fortress, his own country, because he lost the battle. Now Ptolemy the fourth, and the angel is continued to give a political analysis of what's going to happen. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage. That's Ptolemy the fourth. Absolutely fuming he was. He go out and fight him, the king of the north, Antiochus the Great. And at the battle of Raphia, as I said, 217 BC, he, that is the king of the north, Antiochus III, is absolutely defeated. Now, the Ptolemy IV should have made the most of it, but he didn't. He stopped fighting. He didn't pursue him well enough. He went back, was satisfied with the result. The problem is, he died in 204 BC. Had a son that was 4 to 5 years old, Ptolemy V. You guessed it. When he had taken away the multitude, his heart was lifted up. He became arrogant. He thought, this is good enough. I've defeated this Antiochus the Great. However, Antiochus the Great came back like a bad smell. This time he was prepared. The king of the north will return, muster a multitude greater than the former. And this time he's doing well. He is well prepared because the one he is fighting is the youngster, Ptolemy the Fifth, who is not even 20 years old, and he wins. And the demise of the king of the south is now secured. They are going backwards. Ptolemy Epiphanes, it means the illustrious, hardly, but he's defeated, and there it is, and there it is. we now get an introduction to Imperial Rome. Because Rome is on the scene, Rome defeated Antiochus the Great. The son of Antiochus the Great, his name was Antiochus Epiphanes. Anybody ever heard of Antiochus Epiphanes? Yes, good. Let me give you a little story. Antiochus Epiphanes was taken hostage by the Romans when they defeated his dad, Antiochus III, the Great. And he stayed in Rome. And when he stayed in Rome, he could see the armies, the legions of the Romans. A sight to behold as they came back from their expeditions. Now, if anybody knew Rome, it was Antiochus Epiphanes. But when he was allowed to go back to his own country, he was very keen to occupy Egypt. And when he went to Egypt, he was just about, had some successes in the Nile Delta. He was going to take the whole of Egypt. Then there was a cohort of Romans. They were actually, it wasn't a military detachment, but they might have had a few swords amongst them, but they were really representatives of Rome. And they told him, they told this Antiochus Epiphanes, what are you doing here? Go back to your country. You know why? Egypt had become a client of Rome. And if you became a client of Rome, you got that protection. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes is there with a whole army. There's only a few blokes, Romans, over there. I mean, he could have killed them any time. But he knew, you kill a Roman, there'll be plenty more where they come from. And before you know it, you'll be washed over by their legions. So he knew, he was in Rome for a considerable time. He knew. But he didn't want to lose face with his soldiers. So he said to this Roman cohort, he said, oh yeah, well, think about it. And the Roman cohort said to him, the officer said to him, yeah, you do that. Then he took a stick and he drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus Epiphanes. You think about it, he said. You come out of that circle, you better make up your mind because I'll kill you. What could he do? He went back. And then he played havoc with the Jews. And he did terrible things to them. Slaughter, sacrificing swines on the altar, defiling whatever he could defile. Horrendous story. But the Maccabees, which were Judeans, the Maccabees finally got rid of his army. And they did do so in about 3 years. So there you have the story of Antiochus Epiphanes, who died somewhere in the east. Some say it was an accident, some say it was suicide, others say he was killed, whatever. Now, Imperial Rome was unstoppable. Then, of course, Imperial Rome really starts with Augustus. Before that, it was really a republic of sorts. But let's call it Imperial Rome. Now, if you have a look here, this is around 133 BC. See the red one? That's as far as they got. You look at the darker color, you can see the progress that they're making. And of course, this is about 44 BC. Pompey already had arrived and infiltrated, of course, Judah. And then you have the other possibility, which is just fantastic when you look at the area, what Rome controlled. She controlled the then known world virtually for almost 6 centuries. But you go to Rome today, how many Romans will you find? None. They're Lombards. They have disappeared from the face of the earth. A prediction that was made in the book of Daniel, by the way. Let's continue. So, the Roman Republic, round about 40 BC, is that picture there around the Mediterranean. In those days, many shall rise up against the king of the south, the sons of the breakers of your people. They are the many. Now, the interesting thing is, the breakers of your people, who are the people that really, who are your people, Daniel? Well, they are the Jews. Who really devastated the Jews more than anybody else? The Romans. They destroyed the city, Jerusalem, and the temple in 70 AD. They lorded over them since 63 BC. So therefore, yeah, the Romans. We're talking now about the Romans. But he who comes against him, that is the king of the south, shall do according to his own will. No one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land, that means Israel, with destruction in his power. You know, this is what the angel is telling Gabriel is telling Daniel. Fantastic when you get a world history with that amount of detail in chronological orders. It's fantastic. It is almost beyond belief. Mathematically, if you are a mathematician, mathematically it's incredible. The zeros that you have to write down, is innumerable. It couldn't just happen by accident. It could not happen by accident. The Jews expelled the armies of Antiochus Epiphanes in 165 BC, and the Jews became a client of Rome. That's where the word client comes from. It comes from there. They became a client of Rome of 161 BC, and they had a relative peaceful 100 years out of it. Yep. Interesting. They were unstoppable. They were fascinating. Pompey takes control of Jerusalem in 63 BC. Why did he go to Jerusalem? Why did he force his way into Jerusalem? Because there were two feuding factions amongst the Jews. They couldn't settle their differences, and Pompey was going to do it heavy-handedly, and he did. And he might as well, he thought to himself, I'm here, I might as well go a bit of sightseeing. So he walked into the temple, which was not, unless you were a Levite or a priest, obviously. And he marched straight to the most holy place. Because you know that they had a division of the holy and the most holy place. A heavy curtain. And he pushed the curtain aside. Guess what he saw? Nothing. The Ark of the Covenant was taken out of the first temple, placed in a cave, never to be found. Yeah, what are these people worshipping? There's nothing. He couldn't, for the life of him, he couldn't understand what they were worshipping. Interesting, that's what happened. Pompey was of course a rival of Octavian and Mark Antony. And so, Julius Caesar. He was a rival of Julius Caesar. Sorry, I'm just getting ahead a bit. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom. Rome would come in a small portion, and the next moment they are washing all over you. Let's have a look at the Ptolemaic dynasty. What became of the king of the south? Well, it's interesting. I'll pick up again where the angel gives the story. And he shall give him the daughter of woman to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. There's a marriage again. No, not a marriage. There's a woman again. And she's trouble. She's trouble. She's ambitious. She's ambitious. I'll tell you a little bit about her. Oh, she would go through any lengths. You recognize her? She's actually Cleopatra the Seventh. That's her proper name. She took her life in 30 BC because she lost the most significant battle. Now, who did she? She was the daughter of Ptolemy Euletus, that's Ptolemy the 12th. She twice married a brother to stay on the royal line. She would do anything to stay right there, including an liaison with Julius Caesar. She had herself smuggled in a rolled up carpet to visit Julius Caesar. And she must have had all the right perfumes. He liked her. And 3 years later, she became his mistress. And they had a boy. And I don't know whether the name might mean anything to your mothers. The name of the boy was Caesarion. Okay. That's what happened. Now what is interesting is that the angel continues to talk about Julius Caesar. He doesn't name him. He describes him. In biblical prophecy, you have so often that there is a naming. There is no naming, but there's a description. And history tells you who it is. If you were prophesied and it was a negative, and the name was given and you recognized yourself, wouldn't you change your name? Yeah, that's the reason why a description was given, but not a name. Sometimes in the shorter term there was. Okay, have a look. The angel says, after this, getting on with Cleopatra, he shall turn his face to the coastlands. The coastlands are all the countries around the Mediterranean, which was called the Great Sea. And he shall take many. He conquered. Fantastic. I saw, I came, I conquered. Remember that? That's what he said. But the ruler shall bring the reproach against him to an end. There was a reproach because Julius Caesar wanted to be the leader of Rome for life. That's what he wanted. But it was a republic which had a senate. And there were a couple of senators that were extremely, in fact, the whole of the senate was quite unhappy about this aristocratic ways of dealing with them. And then the next verse, then with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. This actually is better translated when you go to the Hebrew, purer translated. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back on him. His insolence, the insolence of Julius Caesar, backfired. That's what it's saying. Look at this. He shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land. What's the fortress of his own land? Rome. So he goes back to Rome. He shall stumble and fall and not be found. Meaning, he didn't plan to. He was assassinated. That's the date here. That's the date here. We know the exact date in history. You can still go to Rome at the very spot where Julius Caesar was assassinated. And that was that. That was that. Poor Cleopatra. So you think she'd be now in mourning. No, there is Mark Antony. Or Richard Burton, wasn't it? Yes, it was. We remember that, don't we? Yes. Okay. That was an off-and-on situation too. Mark Antony is a rival of Octavius. Octavius is the nephew of Julius Caesar, and he's really the entitled successor by all accounts. But that's not how Mark Antony sees it. She has a liaison with him. They decide they're going to fight the Romans. There's a massive sea battle known as the Battle of Actium, 2nd September 31 BC. But they lose it, and Egypt is finished because Cleopatra was the last Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt. And Egypt just becomes a Roman province. Everybody follow me so far? You're doing well, you're doing well. I got no idea what the time is. Huh? Huh? You're kidding? I'm almost finished. The Battle of Actium. Fantastic, very determining. The king of the North, Gaius Julius Octavius. Oops, that's too quick. Do you know? Oh, here it is again. Whose fault is that? Mine. I hate it when it's my fault. Augustus Caesar. There he is. There he is. The first emperor of Rome is Augustus. Augustus Caesar. Okay. There shall arise, the angel is speaking again, in his place, one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom. Glorious kingdom is what? Israel. Or Judea. But within a few days he shall be destroyed. After he did that, it's about 4 or 5 BC. When he did that, he died, and he died in 14 BC. So he died 17, 18 years later. That's just a few days. Not in anger or in battle. What was the year of the prediction of the angel? 536. We are talking here 14 AD. That's almost 5.5 centuries later. He describes him, what he does, And he says, by way of exception, this one will die peaceably. And indeed, Augustus died peaceably in his sleep. He did. He did. Augustus Caesar. Who succeeded Augustus Caesar? Well, his stepson, the son of his favorite wife, Livia, who was first a slave and then became his wife. She was very clever, manipulative. She knew that Junior had to get the best of education. She groomed him. She made sure Augustus gave him every opportunity. When Augustus died, it was not a problem for Tiberius. In his place shall arise a vile person. He was a bit of a nerd. Nobody liked him. To whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably. He didn't have to fight for it. Seize the kingdom by intrigue. This is what the angel is saying in the year 536 BC. The reality about Tiberius is that he got drunk. You know, he was known for that. And some people say he only got drunk once. He just never sobered up. That's what they say. He was killed by his own bodyguard on the island of Caprice. The man just put a pillow over his head and sat on it, and that was it. That was the end of Tiberius Caesar. Okay, let's have a quick look at some of the predictions. We're just about finished. Fourth Persian king would be the richest. He'll engage in warfare in Greece. Greece succeeds Medo-Persia. Greece will be broken up in 4 parts. Alexander's posterity would not rule. Liaison between the king of the north and the daughter of the south, Berenice. The demise of Berenice, revenge by her brother who prevailed. The response attack by the king of the north, which would fail. 10. Second conflict, king of the north ultimately then succeeds. 11. Description and introduction of Rome. Rome would invade Judah. Liaison between Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. Cleopatra's self-interest. Julius Caesar would conquer. Julius Caesar would be assassinated. Description and introduction of Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus would die a natural death. Description and introduction of his successor Tiberius. There's one more. There's one more, and I'm going to show you it after the break. This one. Jesus would die during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. What year was the prediction? 536. 536. Amazing, amazing. So that's what we're going to talk about after the break. You better have a break. You've all done very well. I haven't noticed anybody really sort of dozing off, which is very nice. That doesn't happen every time, but it's all very good. Thank you for that. Okay. Have a break, please. Back in 20 minutes.
Thank you.
20 minutes.